Hi everyone, it's Katie, and today I have a book review for you. Angelo Nasios, I think that's how you pronounce his name, contacted me a couple of months ago and asked if he could send me his book, Tarot, Unlocking the Arcana. Now, Angelo is a member of the community here on YouTube. He's been making videos for ages. If you're interested in all of that stuff, I'll leave some links below as well. Basically, this is kind of an introduction to tarot. It goes through all the basics, all of the kind of key foundational aspects of learning the tarot, but he also has a focus on demystifying a lot of, the more occult sort of sides of tarot. Now, this is published by Schiffer, so it's a hardback. It's really quite lovely. The pages, it's just a nice book to hold and read. I know that's not as important as it is with decks, but I noticed that when I pulled it out of the envelope. And there are some really rave reviews or testimonies from big names in the tarot community. One comes from Mary K. Greer. So Angelo is pretty well known in the community, and apparently quite a number of people really enjoy and respect his work. So the book is broken down into a bunch of sections. The first is Introduction to the Tarot, which is exactly what it sounds like. Section 2, Getting Started, which is getting started reading, working with the tarot. Section 3 is Attributions, Astrology, Elements, Kabbalah, and more. Section 4 is Tarot History, Religion, and Philosophy. Then Section 5 is full of a whole bunch of spreads, not one or two, there's like 20 pages of spreads. I really liked some of those spreads. Section 6 is Sample Readings, and I thought this was really cool because he's got like actual readings that he's done. And some of them, I think most of them are like pop culture stuff. Section 7 is the Tarot Expanded. Now this is just a couple of pages on like miscellaneous stuff really. And then the last 3 sections are the Minor Arcana, the Courts, and the Major Arcana. So a breakdown of the tarot cards. And this is like a good half of the book. And then there is a bibliography, which is always nice to see. So the book is written in a really easy to read, accessible way. A lot of the times I found myself reading in my head with Angelo's voice. Like, he's certainly written in his own voice, which I quite like. It's really easy. It kind of reads like a blog post or something like that. It's good, it's fun. What I don't like though, and my main complaint with the book, is that I feel like it wasn't edited. It was proofread, but it was not edited. Or at least if it was, I'm sorry, but the editor has let him down. There is a lot of redundancy. And perhaps it's just me being picky, but like I ended up underlining stuff because it was annoying me. Just sentences like, neither should you find any conflict either. Like, you don't need the neither and the either. Just stuff like this is pretty recurrent throughout the book. So that is my number one complaint. And I think it's important to note that because it was something that annoyed me and frustrated me. But I don't want to let that taint my overall review because I really enjoyed the content, as I said, and I got a lot out of reading it. In the Introduction to the Tarot section, he kind of already starts going through some of the myths and stuff, myths and misconceptions. That seems to be a big focus for him, and it certainly makes up quite a chunk of the book. He talks about quite a bit about whether tarot is evil or whether it's involves demons, whether it's right or wrong, that sort of stuff. He's really interested and discusses that sort of stuff quite a bit. He talks a little bit about how tarot works, and the fact that, we don't really know. But he kind of breaks down a few of the different main beliefs, and those fall into the 2 main categories of supernatural and natural. In the next section, when he talks about getting started, so this is actually starting to work with tarot, one thing I really liked that I haven't really heard mentioned before, he's called Activating the Question. And I'll read a little bit. It says, it is not enough to think of the question in your head because the question remains internal and private to yourself. To activate the question, it needs to be released into the universe by way of the 4 elements. You think the question for air, speak the question into existence for fire, and write the question onto paper. So water would be the ink and earth would be the paper. He says that you don't have to do this, but I do really like the idea. Not necessarily because I definitely believe that you have to release it to the universe, but more just because, especially when reading for myself, I notice that sometimes I'll just like abstractly think of something that I kind of want an answer to. And then when I do that, my answer is kind of not very clear. Because when I'm doing snail mail tarot readings, I do that. I write stuff down before I'm drawing the cards, and I notice that the answers are always really clear. So I appreciated this part, and it is something that I'm going to keep in mind for myself. In this section, there's kind of like a really quick breakdown of the numbers and the meanings of the cards, like just 2 or 3 words for each one, which is really like a handy little reference to have. And also an overview for the majors, which each have like a couple of sentences. So that's kind of what these ones look like. Now, another part that I liked is when he discussed reading reversals. I don't read reversals, but I did really enjoy learning about the different aspects of reversal meanings. So he talks about how reversals can indicate the opposite meaning of a card, gaining energy, fading energy, fanatical or extreme, weak or lessened, blocked, resisted, absent or missing, karmic or past life. I just thought that was really interesting, how many different ways you can approach reversals. In the attribution section, he talks briefly about the elements and breaks down the suits and the elements, you know, which ones correspond to which. Then there's a couple of pages on numerology and the Tree of Life. He kind of just breaks down the numerology of the Tree of Life and how, you know, the numbers on the Tree of Life can tell us quite a bit about the cards, if that's how we want to approach the tarot. And then also just like one page on general numerology. So there's just like a couple of sentences for each number, 1 to 10. Then there's a couple of pages on astrology and the tarot and the different associations that we have for those. Section 4 is the one that I found most interesting and also the most frustrating to read. That is tarot history, religion and philosophy. And it's a pretty decent sized chapter. There's a lot in here, and you can tell that this is stuff that, you know, really interests Angelo. He kind of obviously has thought quite a lot about this stuff and has quite a passion for this topic. First, he kind of breaks down, you know, tarot history, and then he discusses religion and divination and how some of the different religions see tarot. He also discusses other religions and philosophies such as ancient Greek polytheism, Kabbalah, Eastern philosophy, so for Buddhism and stuff like that, how those religions or philosophies tend to view tarot or did view divination. Then he discusses some pretty heavy philosophical topics in regards to tarot, such as free will. Now, the reason this was my favourite section and my least favourite section is because it's really interesting. It's all really interesting stuff that I find fascinating. But this was the place in which I found the most redundancy. Section 5 is full of spreads, and gosh, how many spreads are there? Let me count. So there's 18 spreads in here, and there's one in another chapter as well. So there's heaps and heaps for you to get going with, as well as kind of suggestions for daily reading. So he gives you a few different questions that you might want to use for your daily spreads. And there's everything in here from 2-card spreads to like the Celtic cross. Now, section 6 is the sample readings, which, as I said, I really enjoyed. So he kind of discusses briefly why reading for stuff in the news and the media can be really beneficial, because, you know, we can kind of follow along and see how our predictions ended up, you know, coming to fruition or not. So he talks about the fact that he uses the Super Bowl, which is that big footy game, I think, in America. And he breaks down how he did those readings, who he predicted, and whether or not his prediction was right. And there's a number of these, like there's a few pages, and then he's also done some for celebrities when, you know, when there's a death that's occurred or a potential pregnancy or something like that. So it's pretty interesting. It's kind of fun because it is pop culture, but it was really fun to see how he established his meanings, how he established his predictions, and to see whether they came true or not, and more often they did. And I just found that really interesting and also refreshing, because so often the sample spreads in books just either don't feel real or they're hypothetical or whatever. Having like actual ones with actual dates, with actual predictions, I just really like this section. Then section 7, the Tarot Expanded. That's pretty brief. It just talks about education and certification and whether we need certification to read tarot, and also a little bit of information or discussion on the sorts of alternative study you might find helpful or beneficial to your tarot practice, such as psychology or sociology. And then the whole second half of the book, which is like, yeah, it's almost a half, or maybe I feel like it's more than half. It's a good chunk, is the card meanings. Loved how he's broken down the cards. Because even though, yes, it's all very Rider-Waite, it's very traditional, some of the stuff he says, he ends up with the same meaning, but he's gotten there in a different way, and it just kind of clicked a few things for me, or made me think about a card in a slightly new or more clear way. So he starts with the Minor Arcana, and he goes through the aces, the twos, the threes for each suit. So he provides a brief description, so that's like 1 or 2 sentences of the description of the image. Symbolism and meaning, so where he discusses, what we see in the card and what those things mean. And then inner reading, so that's talking about how we might interpret that card. And each one for the minors is about a page long. So I just really enjoyed this section. I feel like he's really fleshed out the card well enough without going on too much that it's, too much information. I love that he's got a symbolism and meaning section and then the inner reading section, because so often I see in books they discuss the symbolism and meaning, and it kind of just gets really heady and abstract, which, often symbolism and meaning is. But then he kind of just brings it right back down to what does it mean in a reading. So he does both, and I really like that. I'll read out what he's got for the Four of Cups, a little bit of the symbolism and meaning. He says, the Four of Cups represents what happens when the element of water is forced into structure. You get boredom, apathy, withdrawal. Water does not belong in a state of order and structure. It needs to move and flow. I really like that. I just hadn't really thought of the Four of Cups in that way, but thinking about how when water becomes stagnant, it becomes unhealthy, it becomes dull, it becomes stale. I don't know, I really, really liked that approach to the Four of Cups. Similarly with the Four of Swords, he says, 3 swords are hanging on a wall, which is a reminder of the 3 of Swords. We are putting our problems on hold, hanging them on the wall, putting them off for a moment. The sword on the tomb, the 4th sword, represents the Ace of Swords. We remove ourselves from the confusion by seeking clarity. It's not a different meaning. It is the exact meaning that we're used to, but it's just explained in a new way or justified in a new way. Really like it, and I do, as is in this example, he talks about the other cards in the suits and how the cards relate to each other, especially, in a progression a lot of the time. Being the little mental health advocate I am, though, I have to mention one thing that I didn't really like. For the 5 of Swords, he says, in the psyche of a person, the 5 of Swords manifests as a self-defeating personality disorder. I don't think that's helpful, and I don't think that's accurate. I think it would have been more appropriate to say something like manifest as a self-defeating behavior, or something like that. I don't think the inclusion of personality disorder was helpful. Our next section is on the courts, and he kind of goes through pretty extensively breaking down the courts before he even starts talking about the individual cards. So for example, he talks about the elemental associations of the courts, and then we have again about a page worth of information on each of the courts. Again, it's the description, symbolism and meaning, and what that card might mean in a reading. In these meanings, he also discusses a little bit about the astrological associations. So he kind of brings in a little bit more of those attributions that we were talking about earlier, especially in the courts. Then we have section 10, the last section, and that is for the majors, the Major Arcana, and this is pretty extensive. Each card has 2 to 3 pages worth of information or discussion, and he starts each off with a quote. So for example, the quote for the High Priestess is from Stanley Baldwin, and it is, "I would rather trust a woman's instinct than a man's reason." He'll also often talk about, the philosophy and the religion stuff that we've heard about in the book previously. So he'll discuss, for example, he talks a little bit about Genesis when he's talking about the Fool. He'll also talk about the astrology of the card, and then he kind of talks about what the card looks like, what's the symbolism in the card, and then of course we have what it means in a reading. So kind of we talk about all the philosophy, the theory, the mythology, the astrology, and then he kind of breaks it down in a paragraph or 2 of what it can actually mean when you pull it out in a reading. So yeah, that is the book. Overall, I both loved it and found it a little bit frustrating, mostly because of the editing, and I want to share that because I want to be honest. In that it frustrated me because it wasn't once or twice. It was pretty consistent throughout the book. Not so much in the meaning section as much as it was like in the philosophy section. Mostly redundancy is what it was. It was, a repetition within the sentence or within the paragraph. I really feel like Angelo was let down by whoever edited this book. But overall, I just felt like there was a lot in here that I got a lot out of. The way that he talks about or the sort of stuff that he talks about in terms of religion and philosophy, very interesting. The spreads, how many spreads are in here? It's just awesome, and they're all really interesting, good spreads, and not ones that I've always seen elsewhere. I loved the example readings, and then a good half of the book is the card meanings, and that I just absolutely loved his card meanings. I think his card meanings are some of my favorite that I've read anywhere. You know, there's enough of the interesting fun stuff of numerology and mythology within each card, but it still is usable. It's useful, accessible information. There wasn't anything revolutionary about the meanings themselves, but there was something revolutionary, at least for me, in how he expressed and communicated those meanings. I can't quite put my finger on it, but I just adored how he shared the meanings, how he got to the meanings, how he explained the meanings, how he created kind of a story or an explanation around the meanings. I just really enjoyed that, and I also liked how he connected the cards, especially in the suits, together. It feels different from a lot of the other Tarot 101 books that I've read, and I think that's because it wasn't just... I mean, he touches on the topics, but he doesn't spend chapters talking about how to choose your deck, how to cleanse your deck, like how to shuffle your deck. He'll kind of be like, okay, here's a sentence on that. Now let's talk about philosophy. I don't know, like it was different from other 101 books that I've read. So yeah, if you can get past the redundancy and the poor editing, and you're keen for some really refreshing, great meanings and discussions of the cards, and also those spreads and the sample readings, this is a book I would recommend. I really enjoyed it. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you found this review helpful or interesting. And if you have any comments or questions about this book or anything that I've said, please leave those in the comments below. I'll do my best to get back to you. And until next time, guys, so much love. Bye.